So in my life, Cora's story is connected with, and I'll probably do a deeper one on this spiritual matter because it was, I think, a defining moment for my whole life. Is when I was 3 years old, my baby brother had been born in August, and he had severe physical defects and was a Down syndrome baby. And there's a whole discussion I can do about the medical community and its misdirection and not being very well educated, and in the whole process, how they dealt with my mom in particular. But coming back to baby Keith, he was able to live for about 4 months, and Children's Hospital in Philadelphia was the one that was caring for him as best as they could at that time. So they would give him blood transfusions, and he would just basically bleed back out, and they didn't really know why at the time, but he did have a hole in his heart, which is something they can fix in vitro today while the baby's still in the mother's womb. But that hole did not close, and therefore every time his heart pumped, it was pumping blood in the wrong directions. So it was amazing he lived for 4 months at all. I'll put a picture of him in here. But so now 4 months pass, it's December, I'm turning 3 years old, and it's me and my mom. And when my brother dies, my dad kind of goes and buries himself in his work, and that's how he grieved. And it was my mom and me, at home together. So I do have these glimpses of memories and pieces of him when I was not quite 3 years old. And then I also have some memories of this story I'm going to tell you. Is I was trying to figure out what happened to him. Like, what did death mean? And my mom also wrote a lot about this. So I can end up going back to her notes, and like it kind of affirms my glimpses of memories that I have too. So what I'm telling you is a narration, is kind of a combination of my memories and then her detailed diaries. So I would keep going to my mom and saying like, well, where is baby Keith? And they're like, well, he died. He was really, really sick. He went to heaven, when they would talk about heaven, they were trying to be very graphic. They said he went to Jesus's house. Like, in my house, there were many mansions. That Keith was back home in the spiritual realm. I'm like, okay, well, if he's at Jesus's house, like, why is he not living in our house? He's like, well, he's too sick. He can't live here. I'm like, well, we would get into the car every day, or whenever we're going to the store. I'm like, okay, well, let's go to Jesus's house. I want to see baby Keith. And then it took a while, because I'm talking like a 3-year-old, I think, for mom to figure out what I was saying. And she's like, no, you can't drive to Jesus's house. It's in a different place. We can't get there in a car. So that was all, clearly frustrating. And I'm saying this so parents can understand that I don't believe the lie that the medical community tells us, that children don't really intellectually understand things, because I understood intellectually that there was something that the grown-ups could not explain to me, and my vocabulary didn't exist for me be able to ask the questions that I was trying to ask in my 3-year-old vocabulary. But my mind was not a 3-year-old mind, and it was an eternal soul mind. So you as parents need to think about that your child is not dumb. The child just cannot necessarily describe to you what it is that they're thinking. And you might not realize this because you might not have early childhood memories, but I'm telling you, I am not an exception. This is what we are made of. And because I was able to retain some of my early childhood memories, I can now tell you this. especially when a child is processing death. Just because they're not talking about it doesn't mean they're not thinking about it. So one of my little friends would come over. His name was David, and he would go after baby Keith died. He would like disappear into our house, and my mom's like, David, what are you doing? And he was up in our bedrooms looking under the beds. He's like, I'm looking for baby Keith. And she's like, why would you be doing that? And he's like, oh, because he's sleeping. So his mother had told him that baby Keith was sleeping somewhere. So he wanted to go like check and verify where the baby was actually sleeping, and he couldn't find him. So like in his case, the mom's like, oh, he'll eventually forget about the baby. Like telling this white lie is better to protect him. But children have a BS filter, and they know when you're lying to them, and they know you're not describing something to them. So they're going to go try to figure it out for themselves and kind of distrust you as an information officer is what I'm saying, what I'm telling you goes on. So back to my experience, I was like saying to Mom, she's like, well, it's his body isn't here. His soul went to Jesus's house. His body's, buried in the ground. And at that point I had seen his grave, which was a couple hours away. So it wasn't like around the corner. It was up at like the family plot up in the coal country. So I knew his body was in there and he was under the ground, which always was disturbing to me from that point on. I'm like, I don't want to be down in the ground with the body. I want to be cremated, not down there with the bugs. So my mom was like saying, well, this is an eternal, his eternal soul is with Jesus, and you can't see that. That's invisible to us. So one of the things I was asking her is like, well, if he was here, if he's eternal, it means you're forever. You live forever. Then where was he before he was born? She's like, no. He came, to earth and was born with us. And that's when he was, his soul started. I'm like, but if he's eternal, it means he lived before. And she's like, that's not what I believe. But she couldn't explain to me why. So from that point on, I was like, no, if the soul's eternal, it means it was always here. Like in the spiritual realm. And then it was just visiting to the earth. And no, we can kind of dispute, does it come to the earth a couple different times? Or is it, you get one and done? Everyone can eternally debate about that. But that was my 3-year-old spiritual discussion. So I was still on the track of trying to get the puzzle explained about, well, if he got out of his physical body and left it here, how did he get over there? Because he's just a baby, this little soul. And then this is probably over a 6-month period. So maybe I'm like 3.5 now. And we had the answer came in the mail. So we're in a brownstone kind of house, which in the center city in Fairmount in Philadelphia. It's right next to the church. It's the parsonage, which means it's the house that belongs to the church community, and the pastor and his family is given the gift of living there while they're serving the community. So we're in the parsonage, and the front door has a little mail slot, and this is back before like the days of the mail Unabomber things of the 80s, where all the mail slots were then had to be blocked over. But your mailman or mail lady would put it through the slot in the door, and it'd be laying on the floor of what we called the vestibule. And ours was all this beautiful white marble. It's probably a house built, I don't know, 120 years ago. And there was like another glass interior door, so you're inside of like this little white marble box the shape of an elevator, so it would help block the draft from getting into the house with this double door effect. So I got books in the mail as a child, and I enjoyed hearing like the mail slot open, and was a surprise I would go get the mail and bring it back to my mom if she was like in the kitchen, or doing, she would do a lot of knitting and sewing and things at that point in time in the living room. So I brought the mail back in, and I'm like, I picked up this book. I'm like, read me this book. I want to read this book. Read it to me. And it was Angels, God's Secret Agents by Billy Graham. And like, so she started reading it. She's like, this is a grown-up book. You don't really, I'm like, read it to me. So it was definitely like an angelic, presence was talking to me as well, because I wanted an answer to this, mystery of the ages question. And as she's going along, she's like flipping it around. It gets to the place that, well, when people die, there's like these Bible verse quotes in there. One of the jobs of the angels is to help take our souls back to heaven. And this part I don't remember so well, my mom does. She said I started running around the living room in a circle, because it was like a long kind of oval, rectangle shape. And I'm going, that's how he did it! That's how he did it! And my mom's like, what are you talking about? Who did what? She's like, that's how baby Keith got to heaven. He got there. The angels helped him. He didn't go in the car. The angels helped him get there. And I just kept like running around, like celebrating that I finally had the answer to the puzzle. And she started laughing. She's like, yes, that is how he got there. And so we finally were able to resolve this eternal, complex question, because we listened to ourselves, and we kept talking to each other, my mom and me. And we listened, in my case, to the spiritual intuition. I was being prompted for that book. But there was all this time that went by where I was trying to work and solve the riddle. And it wasn't just given to me. It wasn't like God said, oh, okay, you're asking a question here. So if we think about time being a construct of our physical plane here, it doesn't really matter how long it takes for things to answer. It's all in God's time, quote. So, because it doesn't really exist, because we are eternal. And we're here to learn things. And if we knew what all the answers were before the test was handed out, we wouldn't actually be learning anything, would we? So that's my end of my story with baby Keith and Cora and the angels helping us pass over into the heavenly realm and go back to our real homes. And I think that's it for this one. Namaste.